Good morning, members. Welcome back to the 28th day of the 66th Wyoming Legislature's General Session. It seems like we still have one committee out, so we're going to hold the roll for just a bit. But we are very pleased to be joined by Pastor Zach Brechtold from Grace United Methodist Church. So Pastor Zach, please lead us in our prayer today.
It's an honor and a privilege to be here and be your chaplain this week. I'd invite you to join me in prayer. Most gracious and loving God, we come to be here in these moments, be about the business at hand. May you calm our hearts, calm our minds. May we simply be present with one another and with you as we do the hard work, the important work, the great state of Wyoming. Continue to guide us and lead us throughout our days. And may we look across the aisle and see our brothers and sisters do that work today. Pray these things in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen.
Thank you very much, Pastor Zach. We look forward to tomorrow and the rest of the week with you. Thank you. So, all right, members, if I could have your attention. It is a great honor and privilege to welcome Senator John Barrasso back to the Wyoming Legislature. Senator Barrasso was sworn into the United States Senate in 2007. Come on, you probably know this. Do you want to do this, Senator? In 2007, having represented the people of Natrona County in the Wyoming State Senate from 2003 to 2007. November 8, 2018, Senator Barrasso was reelected to the U.S. Senate with a strong vote out of Wyoming. He is the third ranking member of the Senate Republican leadership as chairman of the Senate Republican Conference. He serves on committees that directly impact Wyoming's economy, energy interests, public lands, national parks, and trade. In addition to other committee assignments, Senator Barrasso is also ranking member of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Senator Barrasso is known to many as Wyoming's doctor. During his 24 years as an orthopedic surgeon, Barrasso served as I just don't like it when they just say Barrasso. I'm sorry. Senator Barrasso served as president of the Wyoming Medical Society and was named Wyoming Physician of the Year. His 3 children, Peter, Emma, and Hadley, and he and his wife, Bobby, live in Casper. Please join me in welcoming home U.S. Senator John Barrasso.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's wonderful to be back here in the Wyoming Legislature. How much I loved my years here. It's nice to look out and see people who I've actually operated on, and you know who I'm talking about. I'm not going to say any names. And for some of the younger members, some of your parents I've operated on. It really is great to come back. I always say there's nothing like the Wyoming Legislature. People say, how are things in Washington? And I tell them it's always better in Wyoming. And when I'm thinking of that, I mean the legislature. You know, the cowboy code, we live each day with courage, take pride in our work, do what needs to be done. And if Art walks in late, nobody points it out, but welcome. The last time I spoke here, it was actually February 20th of 2020. And since then, we've been through a global pandemic and a very consequential election. So when I come here, I kind of always remember the lessons that I learned at the legislature and try to carry with me to Washington. And they're really simple lessons. that government should be a watchdog, not a cow to be milked. That, as Jerry Geis used to always say, when money's coming from Washington, and he was from Washakie County, long-term president of the Senate as well, he'd say, be careful, there's strings attached, it's blackmail and it's bribery, so be careful. And that we always do it the best if you have a government that is limited in its size and its scope and its spending, and you live within your means, have reasonable regulations, low taxes, things that have worked for Wyoming for a long, long time. And we have a delegation that meets regularly, and we continue to focus on things we think is important for Wyoming in terms of our jobs and our economy. And that's been especially critical over the last year as we worked with paycheck protection and tried to make sure people could get back to work or stay on the payroll, trying to make sure we could get kids back to school. And Wyoming did a magnificent job of opening schools last August, while there are still schools around the country that have not opened yet. So those are the kind of things that we focused on with our 5 bipartisan paycheck protection bills that passed. And I know, Steve, you and I have been texting back and forth. This guy texted me one time, 7:30 on a Sunday morning, which shows that when you're in the Wyoming legislature, you're working all the time. And if you're the US Senator, you're taking those texts Sunday morning early. So we all do that. That's what we do. And that's the commitment we have to Wyoming. I love it when people from Wyoming come back to Washington. We haven't had a lot of that this past year. See, Landon Brown was back for a thing at Operation Warp Speed, but you were back with Rachel and an opportunity. But for the most part, people that come to Washington haven't been able to do it this year, although we did have the Wyoming National Guard there. The inauguration, they took over FedEx Field where the Washington football team plays. They actually took over all the press boxes there. So they were full, complete command, and many of them came home, but some of them stayed until last week. I took them on tours of the Capitol building, and they did a wonderful job, and all the delegation met with them. But we do have a new president, a new administration, and in many ways, Wyoming is in the crosshairs of the approach of that administration. Certainly energy is in the crosshairs. As the Speaker of the House said, I'm the ranking member of the Energy Committee. I'm the senior Republican on the Energy Committee. And I would just point out, Mr. Speaker, to be both a veteran of the Marine Corps as well as a veterinarian, nothing could better prepare somebody to be Speaker of this House of Representatives. So strong work. The Energy Committee is such, and people say, well, are you willing to work in a bipartisan way? And absolutely, when it has to do for the benefit of Wyoming. So whether it's the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources, whether it's the Integrated Test Center in Gillette, enhanced oil recovery through carbon capture and sequestration. Look, we have bipartisan groups working on all of those things. But when they draw a target on the back of Wyoming Energy and pull the trigger, I'm going to fight them every step along the way. I'm going to try to continue to bring people back from Wyoming to Washington to testify. Over the 4 years I chaired the Environment and Public Works Committee, I think we had over 30 folks from Wyoming back to testify. I mean, Governor Gordon was there, Governor Meade, Governor Friedenthal, we've had them all. We had lots of people testifying on issues and telling the story of Wyoming and the needs of the people of Wyoming and the contributions of Wyoming to our nation's economy. So we're going to continue to do that. We need to face forward and take a look at what we're facing now. And it is an administration which has a very different view of the lessons I learned in this legislature. The lessons that have to do with regulations, spending, taxes, and energy. And my concern, of course, is the same concerns that you're dealing with every day in terms of how this plays out in terms of our funding for education in Wyoming and the tax revenue coming in from energy and our ability to keep our hospitals open and build our roads and bridges and dams and reservoirs. All of those things are critical as we deal with this going forward. They just passed a $1.9 trillion bill that awful lot of money. I think Wyoming's going to get $1 billion from that. But for the most part, a lot of that money that has been part of this 1.9 trillion was not as focused or targeted as it should have been in terms of actually getting people back to work and kids back to school and the coronavirus behind us. So we're going to continue fighting these fights on a daily basis, and it's going to be a pitched battle in many ways as we continue to fight for Wyoming's resources and our ability to use what we have here in ways that we believe is best for the state and the people of Wyoming long term. But we are a strong and resilient state. We have a level of optimism here that you don't see a lot of other places. As I traveled the state during the pandemic, visiting with people, there was always a can-do attitude of we're going to get through this. We're going to come back stronger than ever. I'm very optimistic. There's a vaccine now that hopefully many of you have gotten. I have gotten. People around Wyoming are getting it at a regular basis now in record numbers. And the economy is coming back stronger. People are back to work. Our unemployment numbers are down. And as one old rancher said to me, he said, I've been through a lot. He is kind of one of these gritty guys, grit, endurance, determination. He said, we've been through worse. And he's right. We will do well. We talk about the heroes among us, and I mentioned our armed services and the men and women who are there defending and protecting the Capitol. I did have a chance to go overseas, as I go every year at Thanksgiving, to see our Charlie Med crew over at Al Udeid Air Force Base in the Persian Gulf, to thank them, as you do routinely, thank the men and women in uniform. We've also had during this pandemic year here in Wyoming, whether it's our first responders, whether it's law enforcement, the men and women on the front lines, the hospital workers, the people in the schools and the grocery stores. I go to schools and say, how did you do it? How did you stay open? And they thank the school nurses and the custodians, in addition to the teachers and the parents and the students. So we've had among us this past year, we really saw the heroes of Wyoming step up all across the state. So I just wanted to thank you for allowing me to join you again today. I love coming back to the legislature. Let me just end by saying, God bless you and God bless Wyoming. God bless these United States of America. Thanks for letting me join you today.
Done the hallway thing before we go down. I'll go do it. I'll come with it.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Barrasso. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today, and we thank you for your service in Washington on behalf of Wyoming. All right, let's try roll call.
Convening roll, 28th day, Monday, March 29th, 2021. Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Prego. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner.
Here.
Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kenner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Worf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Swanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Hallinan. 60 present.
Thank you very much. Representative Oakley, you would like a privilege of the floor? Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the honor today of introducing a Fremont County legend. She is a long-term, if you'd stand up, Eileen, long-term elected assessor, a member of Fremont County Cattle Women, former president of the Fremont County Republican Women, current state committee woman, and mother extraordinaire, my mom, Eileen Oakley.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here. Great to have you. Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So in the South Gallery, if she'd stand up, is my longtime business partner and my daughter, Holly Jennings from Sheridan.
Any other privileges? Well, I'll take one now. We have Deej Reardon here, Campbell County Commissioner, represents my county well. Welcome, Deej. All right, any other privileges? Any other privileges? So this is the last Monday that we have planned for the 66th Wyoming Legislature. So I think we probably should play ball. All right, members, let's come back to order. Journal Committee report.
Your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of March 26, 2021 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Representatives Haroldson and Provenza.
Thank you. Standing committee reports.
Mr. Speaker, your committee number 9, Minerals, Business and Economic Development, to whom was referred Senate File 82 engrossed, Local Impact Assistant Payments. Respectful report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Bear, Burkhart, Duncan, Air, Gray, Greer, Heiner, Western. Noes, Representative Sherwood. Representative Greer, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 4, Education, to whom was referred Senate File 68 engrossed, Absenteeism in Public Schools. Respectful report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Andrew, Brown, Harshman, Nyman, Newsom, Paxton, Summers. Noes, Representative Obermueller. Excused, Representative Connolly. Representative Paxton, Chairman.
Chairman Eklund, did you have a re-referral?
Mr. Speaker, yes, I do. I'd like to re-refer Senate File 122 to appropriations.
Without objection, Senate File 122 is referred to Committee number 2, Appropriations. All right, members, we're at that order of business of bills on second reading. First bill for our consideration is Senate File 33.
Senate File 33, sponsored by Senator Baldwin. Physician's Assistants Amendments, an act relating to physician's assistants.
Senate File 33, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under House Rule 7-3, can I request Senate File 136 be laid back one day?
So hearing no objection, House Senate File 136 is laid back one day under 7-3. Thank you. Next Senate file for consideration is 74.
Senate File 74, sponsored by Senator Landon. Athletic trainer revisions, an act relating to athletic trainers.
Senate File 74, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Next Senate File 87.
Senate File 87, sponsored by Senator Cost. Voyeurism amendments, an act relating to crimes and offenses.
We do have an amendment. Representative Stiff.
Mr. Speaker, I move second reading amendment number 1 and ask for your favorable consideration. So we talked about this a bit on Friday, and here's the problem that the current bill draft creates. Under the current bill draft, it doesn't matter. You can be out in the open, you can be on a beach, you can be in a park, you can be in a courtroom, out in the open someplace. And if a person observes any part of another person's body under their clothing, then they're guilty, or clandestinely observes them, then they're guilty of a felony. So to illustrate this, I'd like to tell a brief, short, true story of my client whom I told to show up at trial wearing a blue shirt because blue means honesty, right? I said, you're accused of fraud, so we're going to convince him you're an honest person. So he did dutifully show up in his blue shirt. It was, however, unbuttoned down below his sternum, and he had a gold chain, right? So he takes the stand to testify, of course, right? And the judge is sitting, sort of this way. So the judge asks him, did it really cost you $40,000? And my client, sort of blurring the distinction between sworn testimony and the art of negotiation, said, would 30,000 be okay? What do you think? Would 30,000 be? So while she's asking that question, she's clandestinely viewing his torso under his shirt and his gang insignia tattoo, right? So if this bill language were the law, then the judge would be guilty of misdemeanor voyeurism. Okay, so the problem with the current language is we're going to criminalize conduct we don't normally think of as criminal. So as a result of that, what this amendment does is it deletes lines 16 through 18 on page 2. So that's what it does. This isn't the only solution. There are probably other, but I think this is the easiest solution. I think we just, and the big change on the misdemeanor piece of this bill is that the current law says that you have to observe someone clandestinely in an enclosed area. And it's kind of designed for dressing rooms and bathrooms and things like that, right? That's what it's designed for. But by deleting the phrase enclosed area, now voyeurism can occur if you view any portion of anyone's body clandestinely under their clothing out in the open. Doesn't matter, doesn't have to be an intimate area or an intimate part of their body. So on and for this amendment to clean this up and to prevent us from criminalizing conduct that we would not otherwise think of as criminal. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member for their on the amendment? Chairman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the amendment. And I actually really appreciate the example we just had in the courtroom because the existing misdemeanor statute already speaks to that. It would not be a criminal activity, at least not in my mind, because if you look at page 2, line 8 through 9, key language, the person being viewed has a reasonable expectation of privacy, a reasonable expectation of privacy. I'm not certain that that's walking into a courtroom with your shirt buttoned down into a public courtroom. I'm not sure that you have that reasonable expectation of privacy with your shirt buttoned down in a public courtroom. Now, that could be a question of fact if you were to flip that and you were a female and you were in a skirt and you were in the courtroom and the Yahoo sitting next to you takes out his phone and slides it under. Did you have a reasonable expectation under your skirt? Absolutely. I think you did. And I think that this example is really taking us to a place where I don't think the statute is designed to go. I think the statute is commonsensical. I think that the prosecutor would have an opportunity to decide whether they should prosecute the guy who filmed under the woman's skirt in a courtroom and the guy who had his shirt buttoned down and the judge was looking at him in the courtroom. And the prosecutor is going to use prosecutorial discretion. And I think we all know where that prosecutor is going to land on that. The other issue I really have with the amendment is that it takes us away from the felony. And the focus of this bill is really, truly at the heart, trying to address the loophole that we have in the felony law. And yeah, it attaches to the misdemeanor. Because if we say you have a reasonable expectation of privacy, and we're talking about the example, literally, under the skirt, under the clothing being worn by another person, that's line 2, regardless of whether the person is in a place where the person has a reasonable expectation of privacy. If you take that away, you just took out the example of the woman in the skirt in the courtroom with a phone under, with a gentleman holding a phone, reaching under, or maybe even view, that's the felony version, or viewing would be the misdemeanor portion. And I think that's the whole intent, is to capture that bad actor. So I just, on and against the amendment, this question has been before the legislature for a couple of years now. I think it's time that we drive it home, we clear up this loophole, and we send a clear message to the people of Wyoming that these are serious crimes and we're going to treat them as such.
Any other member for their first time? Representative Duncan, first time on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the amendment, the whole intent of this bill was to close a loophole. Now we're opening it back up. So I gave you the example on first reading, and I really strongly urge you to remember how open this statute is. So on and against the amendment for the bill.
Any other member for their first time? For their first time. First time, second time. Second time to the sponsor, Representative Stiff.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. So I appreciate the comments from the representative from District 11, but recall what he said at the very beginning. He said that lines 8 and 9 on page 2 require that you have a reasonable expectation of privacy. It says, well, obviously in a courtroom you don't. But then he also read from lines 16 through 18 on page 2, which specifically say that you're guilty regardless of whether you have a reasonable expectation of privacy or not. Okay? And that's the problem, because lines 16 through 18 on page 2, which deal with the misdemeanor section, say it, even if you're in a public place and you have no reasonable expectation of privacy, you're still the victim of voyeurism, or the person looking at you is guilty of misdemeanor voyeurism. That's the exact problem that this amendment addresses. In other words, the reasonable expectation of privacy that you have on lines 8 and 9 in the misdemeanor section on page 2 get taken away with respect on lines 16 through 18. So that's why we need to take this language out. With respect to the upskirt issue that the district representative from District 11 referred to, that's covered in the felony provision on page 3. That's when you're recording someone, you're taking a picture of someone, the traditional upskirt problem. This amendment does not change that at all. This amendment deals only with the misdemeanor portion. I think the felony portion of this bill on pages 3 is fine. It's a good bill. You know, I'm going to vote yes on the bill, but let's clean this up so that we're not criminalizing conduct that we wouldn't think of as being criminal. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, we are voting on second reading amendment number 1, Senate File 87. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Amendment is adopted. Senate File 87 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Next Senate file for our consideration is 96.
Senate File 96, sponsored by Senator Hutchins. Homicide amendments, an act relating to crimes and offenses.
We do have an amendment. Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Pleased to move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 96 and ask for your favorable consideration. This just cleans up the definition part. We had a weird double definition where A equals B and B equals C. And so I just rewrote it so A equals C. And so if you look on page 1 or page 2 in the definitions, we're putting 2 new definitions, 18 and 19 in the statute. And so this just combines it into one definition and then renumbers. So you don't have 20, you still just have 19. Happy to answer any questions.
Any other member for their first time? Members for their first time, second reading amendment number 1. First time, second time. Members, we are voting on second reading amendment number 1, Senate File 96. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. Senate File 96 having been read 2 separate times. There is another amendment. I don't have it. Oh, I do have it. Sorry. Read the script. Chairman Olson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File number 96 and do ask for your favorable consideration. This amendment does not substantively change anything in the bill. What it is, something we were cognizant of in the committee and worked with LSO as it came out of committee, just trying to do some reorganization to this statute to make it flow a little better. And I'll just show you the main example is really one of the questions that came up in our committee is, well, does this statute cover attempted murder? And the sponsor of the bill told us no. And maybe that's because of the way that it's designed, in that we put both 2 different crimes, an attempted murder and a murder, in the same romanette. So just as an example, we're going to separate that out and make it its own category just to make the law flow a little clearer. Again, there's no substantive change in this amendment. It's just really trying to make it flow more consistent with how we design our criminal statutes. And so I hope hope you'd be in favor of it. So I believe it's a friendly amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I just have a question on the amendment lines 29 through 31. I don't quite understand how line 31 reads. A child shall be imprisoned in the penitentiary for any term not less than 20 years, comma, or during life. And if the good bringer of the amendment could just explain if there's a word missing or it's a legal term, it just doesn't make sense to me as a sentence.
Other member for their first time? Any other member for their first time? Representative Sweeney, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So my problem with this bill has been about the doctors. And so in the amendment, could the bringer of the amendment kind of clarify if this alleviates some of those concerns about our medical community through no nefarious reasons? Does it better clarify that? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? We are on first time. Representative Oakley, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So to two previous questions ago, that or during life language is used commonly. And what that is so you have to have a term. So it has to be like 20 years or a maximum. And so on these murders, it's 20 years min or during life. And that specifies the end term, which is that it's up to a life imprisonment as the back term. And so that's commonly used. And I do believe that came from Ellisel, and that's other places in our statute. And to the last speaker, I just still think there's some confusion when you're talking about a doctor or anything in this bill, because this is about, in order for the murder of the unborn child to be on the table, it has to be that the person premeditatedly and purposely and maliciously attempted or killed a human being. So in both of these, it attaches to murder in the first degree or murder in the second degree. So there has to be that finding first, and it includes the terms malice and maliciously are defined in both of those, with ill will, hostility. So an underlying, a component of this has to be that there was a murder or attempted murder of the pregnant woman. So I just see under no scenario should this attach to healthcare workers or a doctor or anything like that. It has to be that they purposely and unlawfully or purposely and with premeditation tried to kill the woman.
Thank you. Any other members for their first time? First time, Representative Grego.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question for the bringer of the amendment. On page 3, line 3, we're deleting or attempted actions. And I'm just curious why we're doing that.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? We are on first time. Members for their first time, second time. Second time to the sponsor, Representative Olson, Chairman Olson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the last question, it's because we're carving that attempted murder out separately. So attempted murder is still covered in the statute, still covered the exact same way the original bill did. It's just that it all blurred together in one subsection, and now we're just carving it out into a separate subsection. So it's being deleted from the first subsection and it's getting its own subsection is all that's happening there. So substantively, the policy doesn't change, still covers murder in the first degree, second degree, attempted murder in the first degree and second degree.
Thank you. Members, we are voting on second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 96. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. Senate File 96 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Next, Senate File 106.
Senate File 106, sponsored by Senator Landon. Transportation Statutory Amendments 1, an act relating to highways and transportation.
Senate File 106, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, so ordered. Next, Senate File 107.
Senate File 107, sponsored by Senator Landon. Transportation Statutory Amendments 2, an act relating to highways and transportation.
Senate File 107, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, so ordered. Next, Senate File 108.
Senate File 108, sponsored by Senator Cooper. Career and Technical Education Terminology, an act relating to education.
Senate File 108, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Next, Senate File 109.
Senate File 109, sponsored by Senator Cooper. Board of Dental Examiners Amendments, an act relating to dentists and dental hygienists.
Senate File 109, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Senate File 110.
Senate File 110, sponsored by Senator Nethercott. Small Claims Procedures, an act relating to small claims procedures.
Senate File 110, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Next, Senate File 115.
Senate File 115, sponsored by Senator Cost. Education, Pupil Teacher Contact Time, an act relating to education.
Senate File 115, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Senate File 116.
Senate File 116, sponsored by Senator Ellis. Wyoming Business Council Directors, Reduction, an act relating to administration of government.
Senate File 116, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Next, Senate File 124.
Senate File 124, sponsored by Senator Nethercott. Defending Wyoming Business, Trade, and Commerce Amendments, an act relating to trade and commerce.
Senate File 124, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Next, Senate File 155.
Senate File 155, sponsored by Senator Driscoll. Limited firearm seizures and regulation during emergencies, an act relating to Homeland Security.
Senate File 155, having read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move the consent list consisting of the following bills: Senate Files 2, 39, 40, 44, 47, 50, 52, 58, 62, 72, 79, 88, 93, and 119.
Would any member like a bill removed from the consent list? Representative Larson, Dan.
Mr. Speaker, Senate File 2.
Thank you. Senate without objection. Senate File 2 is removed from the consent list. Any other member like a bill removed? Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Senate File 88.
Senate File 88 is removed from the consent list. Any other member like a bill removed from the consent list? Any other bills removed from the consent list? So the consent list will consist of 39, 40, 44, 47, 50, 52, 58, 62, 72, 79, 93, and 119. Reading clerk, will you read those bills, please?
Senate File 39, sponsored by Blockchain. Digital Identity, an act relating to trade and commerce being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 40, sponsored by Minerals. Wyoming Money Transmitters Act amendments, an act relating to trade and commerce being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 44, sponsored by Minerals. Solid Waste Cease and Transfer Program funding, an act relating to the prioritization of municipal solid waste facilities cease and transfer projects being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 47, sponsored by Senator Case. Clinical Laboratory Regulation, an act relating to professions and occupations being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 50, sponsored by Agriculture. COVID-19 Business Relief Programs, Agriculture, an act relating to emergency expenses of government related to business relief being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 52, sponsored by Labor. Insurance, mental health, and substance use parity. An act relating to insurance, be it enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 58, sponsored by Education. Wyoming Investment in Nursing Funding, an act relating to administration of government, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 62, sponsored by Management Audit. Repealing sunset date for Office of Consumer Advocate, an act relating to the Office of Consumer Advocate, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 72, sponsored by Appropriations, Financial Counsel and Reporting Budget Reductions. An act relating to administration of government being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 79, sponsored by Appropriations. Medicaid billing for school-based services. An act relating to school finance being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 93, sponsored by Appropriations, the WICHE Repayment Program, Veterinary Medicine Students. An act relating to the Western Interstate Commerce for Higher Education, WICHE Repayment Program, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 119, sponsored by Appropriations, Investment of State Permanent Funds. An act relating to public funds, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the House? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Roll call on the consent. Andrew. Baker. Banks. Bear. Blackburn. Brown. Burkhart. Burt. Clausen. Clifford. Connolly. Crago. Duncan. Eklund. Air. Flitner. Fortner.
Aye.
Gray. Greer. Hallinan. Haroldson. Harshman. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hunt. Jennings. Kinner. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson Dan. McGuire. Martinez. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Paxton. Provenza. Roscoe. Schwartz. Sherwood. Simpson. Summers. Stith. Stivar. Sweeney. Walters. Washit. Western. Wharf. Williams. Wilson. Winter. Yin. Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Harshman. Excused. We have 59 aye, 1 excused. As for Senate File 39, are there any changes? Gray, aye to no. Washit, aye to no. Burt, aye to no. Knapp, aye to no. Winter, aye to no. Stivar, aye to no. Jennings, aye to no. Larson Dan, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Fortner, aye to no. Nyman, aye to no. Worf, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Burt, no to aye. Closing vote. The vote is closed. 48 aye, 11 no, 1 excused. As for Senate File 40, are there any changes? Gray, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 58 aye, 1 no, 1 excused. As for Senate File 44, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 59 aye, 1 excused.
Madam Speaker,
or Mr. Speaker, you're not counting my hand. I've had it up for the last two to be no. I don't know if my hand's not showing or if it's,
Thank you.
you're just missing me.
Thank you, Representative Fortner. So we will certainly count your hand in this one. So it's the Senate File 44. Chief Clerk.
You can change it.
Can I announce it? Representative Fortner, I want to affirm that you wanted a no vote on Senate File 40. Is that correct?
A no vote on Senate File 39 and a no vote on Senate File 2.
All right, we haven't done Senate File 2 yet, Representative Fortner.
Okay.
So, all right. Thank you, Representative Fortner. I apologize. We'll both watch the screen. Representative Fortner, could I affirm that you wanted a no vote on Senate File 44, correct?
No, not on 44, just on 39.
Then you need to lower your hand, please.
Yep. Take your hand down off the screen. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
For 40,
Chief Clerk, what's the
47
roll
is-
on Senate File 44, please, so we are all on the same page?
Senate File 47 is 59 aye, 1 excused. Or 44, sorry.
Thank you. 44. Next one will be 47.
Okay, Senate File 44 was 59 aye, 1 excused. So now, as for Senate File 47, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote is closed. 59 aye, 1 excused. As for Senate File 50, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Burt, aye to no. Greer, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 57 aye, 2 no, 1 excused. As for Senate File 52, are there any changes? Gray, aye to no. Burt, aye to no. Fortner, aye to no. Further changes? Winter, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 55 aye, 4 no, 1 excused. As for Senate File 58, are there any changes? Bear, aye to no. Greer, aye to no. Knapp, aye to no. Jennings, aye to no. Heiner, aye to no. Gray, aye to no. Burt, aye to no. Haroldson, aye to no. Nyman, aye to no. Clausen, aye to no. Stivar, aye to no. Obermuller, aye to no. Worf, aye to no. Fortner, aye to no. Larson Dan, aye to no. Hallinan, aye to no. Winter, aye to no. Williams, aye to no. Blackburn, aye. Blackburn, are you an aye? Okay. Harshman, excused to aye. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 42 aye, 18 no. For Senate File 62, are there any changes? Harshman, excused to aye. Haroldson, aye to no. Blackburn, aye to no. Burt, aye to no. Hunt, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 56 aye, 4 no. As for Senate File 72, are there any changes? Harshman excused to aye. Fortner, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 59 aye, 1 no. As for Senate File 79, are there any changes? Gray, aye to no. Burt, aye to no. Harshman, excused to aye. Ottman, aye to no. Knapp, aye to no. Winter, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote is closed. 55 aye, 5 no. As for Senate File 93, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Harshman excused to aye. Okay. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 60 aye. And as for House Bill 119, are there any changes? Harshman excused to aye. Brown, aye to no. Fortner, aye to no. Gray, aye to no. Further changes? Close. Burt, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 56 aye, 4 no.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, Senate Files 39, 40, 44, 47, 50, 52, 58, 62, 72, 79, 93, and 119 have passed the House. We're now at that order of business of third reading regular list. The first bill for our consideration is Senate File 25.
Senate File 25, sponsored by Agriculture. Animal impound proceedings, bond and disposition. An act relating to crimes and offenses being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
We do have an amendment, and members, there is a corrected copy out. Corrected copy. Chairman Greer.
Mr. Speaker, I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 25. Members, if you'll recall, during Committee of the Whole, I had concerns about some of the process that was associated with this legislation. Talking to members of our Ag Committee, they had impressed upon me that there were also components of this bill that were very important that we did need as a state, and I agree with them. So what I did was work through this and try to clean up some of the process. And I have a very complex amendment that I'll take you all through. But it's not quite as complex as it looks. What I did is I just worked with just the livestock component of it. I did not touch anything to do with pets. And that was my decision, just to work with the livestock, which affects my constituents and the people that I know. When we have an abuse situation or cruelty situation with that, the animals are impounded, and they need to be impounded for various reasons, but primarily to take care of them. And to take care of them has an expense associated with it. So that is very much, and I look at it this way, much like a seizure or a forfeiture type of arrangement in the criminal matter. And so they track, while they're interrelated, they still track a little bit differently, and they're different processes. And as a bill is drafted, there was to be an assumption that they would go ahead and follow in together, and that made me uncomfortable. So what I want to do is make sure that process was there. So what we did is that, so the criminal matter, the person cited, That criminal matter will proceed as it normally would. But what this amendment does then is provides due process with respect to the person's property that has been seized. Okay, and one of the key components of this is that within 72 hours of the livestock being seized, is there will be a bond hearing. And that bond hearing is not a probable cause hearing because all things of forfeiture are by a preponderance of the evidence. And so what we'll do is we'll get to this point in time very quickly in this to see whether or not that bond should be posted or the animal is returned. And then it has, more importantly, what has been the concern and why this bill was brought forward was the issue of what happens if somebody, one, doesn't have the wherewithal to take care of the animals, doesn't really care about the animals. How do we get to a disposition? And so I've preserved all of the substantive components of the bill, but tried to bring the procedure together. So that's the sort of the high level view. I believe this works well, quite frankly, but it was not easy to get to. So I'll take you through this because it is a complex amendment, and I'm not going to just say, hey, trust me on this. So the first part of the amendment's page 1, line 7, which we're just simply saying says provide for an effective date, or there are 2 effective dates when these items kick in. And the reason for that is, if you recall, back in the virtual session, we did another bill that was passed and enacted into law regarding these animals. So we had to go back, look at what we did there and make sure we were consistent going forward. Well, it had a different effective date than this bill. So that's the first amendment on that. The second amendment is on page 7, page 6, line 22. And this has to deal with the committee of the whole amendment, which we're deleting, and I'll explain the reason why, is because instead of using this terminology over and over, we have a couple definitions that are put into this amendment to make sure we're consistent, because what we are finding is our definitions were different in other places. So on page 7, line 1, we delete the balance of the line after J. And the reason for that is we are then amending and correcting some of the work and conforming, quite frankly, conforming the work that we had done in the virtual session. So then, if for the sake of simplicity, what we've done, then I'm on page 1 of the amendment, line 19, is we've inserted some definitions into the act. One was, you remember the discussion on what is a person of authority? Well, for livestock, that's a little bit different than it is for pets in certain municipalities. So we've cleaned up, for purposes of livestock, what a person of authority is. And then also reasonable costs of impoundment. There were 3 different definitions of reasonable costs of impoundment in this darn bill. So now we've got one. Okay. Then we come back, moving on down, where we delete page 7, line 17, and then on page 8, line 1 through 12. We're deleting them in the bill, but we're not getting rid of them. Those are substantive components that are important. What we're doing is they're being rewritten and amended in section 4 in the amendment. Same thing. So on page 8, line 14, for simplicity, we'll say that the bond and insert required by section B. Well, section B is now in section 4. Page 8, line 20, we're taking out upon a motion made and going to an instant bond hearing. Bond hearing shall be required on that. Page 9, line 7, you guys have to excuse me because it is even for me. What we wanted to say too is to dispose of can also mean or return the animal to the owner. That is that's one of those things that could occur in this. Okay. We move over to page 9 and 13 and 14. I've just got here. So what we're talking about is naming this, instead of a forfeiture or those language, we're using this term during a disposition hearing. Okay. And getting to this using the term of disposition. Disposition means the animal can be kept, sold, it can be destroyed, euthanized if need be, or returned to the owner. Okay, I see people are looking the other direction, so I'll move along through this. Know your audience, of course. So I think then the real key is when we start to look at the section 4 and the amendment. And so we turn to this. So we're talking about any livestock impounded. And it says within the earlier of 72 hours of impoundment or charges being filed, that's charges against the owner, that the circuit court shall hold a hearing to set bond the amount of the circuit court determine what is sufficient to provide for livestock animals reasonable costs of impoundment for at least 90 days, just what was in the other law associated with that. And they could make a determination at that point in time, a disposition that these animals need to be sold, butchered in some cases, other cases euthanized, or maybe they find that this was a huge mistake all the way around. And we talked in terms of what happens when you take grandpa's horse who come out of the winter, you know, it's his last winter. And boy, you trim his hooves up and you deworm him and you give him some grain. You say, we're going to give him one more summer. That happens more often than what you realize. So the person charged goes in, explains that to the judge, and the judge goes, okay, we don't need all this. You take the animal back home and we move on. So those are the types of scenarios that we were trying to deal with, to follow a process that would work and not tie somebody's hands with it. And that really, except for instead of saying this probable cause standard, we go to the preponderance of the evidence. And what's the difference between that? Preponderance of the evidence is, everybody says it's 51%. So it's not a super high standard, but it's a standard that's a little bit more than you've just been accused of a crime, or you've just been accused of something happening. So all in all, I think a lot of cleanup on this, making the definitions the same, keeping this disposition hearing on impoundment more like a forfeiture type of arrangement with a hearing that is set in place, provides protection to the accused for their property and procedural due process. And I hope that in the remaining time in the legislature, I never bring such a complex amendment ever again. And I ask for your favorable vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? Representative Clausen, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a good amendment. It helps reorganize. This is a tough piece of law, and I commend the good Chairman of Minerals for his work on this. It rearranges some things, doesn't change a whole bunch of stuff substantively, but it does help out with the process.
So we now have 2 members for our joint conference committee. Any other member? Any other for their first time? First time. Representative Craigo.
On in favor of the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Somebody's got to be against this so I can complete the conference committee. Any other members for their first time? First time, third reading amendment number 1. First time, second time. The author is exhausted. So members, we are voting on third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 25. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. We have third reading amendment number 2. Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 25, and I will keep my explanation brief because the former amendment bringer just clarified everything that I would need to say. So essentially, what my amendment does is apply all the changes that we just made to the livestock section of the statute to the pet section as well, so that our local judges, when looking at these procedures, don't have to determine whether we're dealing with a pet or a livestock animal. The same procedure would apply, and that's essentially all the amendment does. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member for their first time? First time. We're a trusting crowd today. First time, second time to the sponsors. So members, we're voting on third reading amendment number 2, Senate File 25. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. Third reading amendment number 3, Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pleased to move third reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 25. And you'll know I have 3 amendments coming. Just to quickly explain what they all do. The first, if you look at the beginning of this amendment, when we had Senate File 26, I believe, where we reorganized the statutes, this body, actually, we all agreed that we take out the aggravated cruelty provision. So you remember we used to have cruelty aggravated cruelty and felony cruelty. In the other bill, we took out aggravated, so that's just cleanup. So the first two amendments, I'm bringing our policy decisions. If they both fail, then I still have the cleanup in amendment number 5. But what this amendment does is I was reading through the bill with the amendment this weekend. 30 plus states have this provision that if you are charged with a felony, you basically lose possession or claim to that animal. My hope or my thought, regardless if it's a livestock or an animal, if you know that you're being charged with a felony, you're much more likely, if you have to have the cost of care for the in length of that trial, maybe you're more likely to plead guilty, or if it's worthwhile to fight it, you have this provision. So I think it generally makes sense. Nobody would think if you get charged with a felony, that means you've either killed the animal or you've basically done everything that would otherwise result in death, but somehow they were able to prevent death. And you would imagine the vet bill on that is going to be a little high. So I think it's probably assumed, but it's not written in statute. So what the amendment does is specifically say, if you're charged with that felony of attempting to kill an animal, you don't get that animal back, regardless if it's a household pet or livestock. Be happy to answer any questions.
Any member for their first time, second time to the sponsor. So members, we're voting on third reading, amendment number 3, Senate File 25. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. Third reading number 4.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pleased to move third reading amendment number 4 to Senate File 25. This is an instance that came out of my county, and I'll just quickly tell you what the amendment does. If it is a abandonment due to if you look in the law, it's extreme indifference abandonment, you can be allowed to be charged with either a felony or a misdemeanor. So we had a case here in Laramie County where a gentleman, well, I wouldn't call him a gentleman, a person basically left town, locked his dogs in the basement, and if the landlord hadn't checked in, I think 6 days later and waited one more day, neither one of those household pets would have made it. And so they could only charge the person with a misdemeanor, and this would allow a potential felony provision if you could prove abandonment with extreme indifference. Basically, you leave your household pets, I guess, or your livestock locked up in a way that you know that they're not going to make it. And so we've had these situations a couple times with animal hoarders in my community and other parts of the state that this just allows prosecutorial discretion. If it rises to the level of felony, animal doesn't pass away, but it was going to, except for some type of serendipitous cause, the prosecutor could still decide whether or not to charge that person with a felony due to abandonment with extreme indifference.
Any member for their first time, third reading amendment number 4. First time. Second time to the sponsor. Members, we're voting on third reading amendment number 4, Senate File 25. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment is adopted. Third reading amendment number 5. Chairman Swanitzer.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to withdraw third reading amendment number 5 as we covered it in amendment number 3.
So number 5 is withdrawn. Number 6, just kidding. All right, Senate File 25. Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew, Baker, Banks, Bear, Blackburn, Brown, Burkhart, Burt, Clausen, Clifford, Connolly, Crago, Duncan, Eklund, Air, Flitner, Fortner, Gray, Greer, Hallinan, Haroldson, Harshman, Heiner, Henderson, Hunt, Jennings, Kenner, Knapp, Larson Lloyd, Larson Dan, McGuire, Martinez, Nyman, Newsom, Nicholas, Oakley, Obermuller, O'Hearn, Olson, Ottman, Paxton, Provenza, Roscoe, Schwartz, Sherwood, Simpson, Summers, Stith, Stivar, Sweeney, Walters, Washit, Western, Wharf, Williams, Wilson, Winter, Yin, Zwanitzer, Mr. Speaker. Hunt. Excused. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Larson Dan, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Stivar, aye to no. Knapp, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. The vote is closed. 40 aye, 19 no, 1 excused.
House Bill, Senate File 25, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, Senate File 25 has passed the House. Next Senate File is 36.
Senate File 36, sponsored by Blockchain. For-profit public benefit corporations. An act relating to corporations being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Senate File 36, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll. We do not have an amendment. Okay, hold on. We'll stand at ease for just a moment. Thank you. We do have an amendment. But we don't have the sponsor of the amendment.
I can move the amendment now.
Mr. Speaker.
Sponsor. So it has to be, what does it have to be? All right. Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Okay, you got it up. All right.
Mr. Speaker, I would move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 36 and let the debate begin, I guess.
So members, this is a delete enacting clause. So this will be obviously the only amendment on the bill since we're taking it up first. Representative Gray for your first time.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I'm very concerned about this bill, Mr. Speaker. This bill came out of the blockchain committee and I just don't see really a nexus to blockchain issues. I mean, I'm sure you could build one, but this is going to have enormous consequences for ranching operations, I'm afraid, and the ranching lifestyle in our state. And I'm very concerned about the consequences of this bill. I think it upends a lot of, the idea of a nonprofit. Suddenly we're going to be able to distribute proceeds from a nonprofit to shareholders. It's a huge change. It's come out of a task force or a select committee that really, it has a ancillary consequence in another industry. And I'd urge a no vote on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Hunt for your first time, and then Chairman Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My sincere apologies for not being here to move my amendment. But anyway, for the amendment and against the bill, excuse me. And again, my concern with this is that there is the potential for an entity to come in under this newly formed type of corporation and use the excuse of a for-profit company as a cover for political influence. And that is the crux of the issue here for me. And I don't care what side of what way it is on the spectrum. It's not about either party. It's not about political ideology. It's simply about the issue at the base of it, which is when it comes to the public benefit side of this, is where are we creating this gray area where public benefit morphs into political action in some form. And so that's my concern. When we're talking about, and with the list in the bill, it can be for music, it can be for culture, it can be for art, et cetera. But that's my chief concern. We're not talking about donating money or some sort of fund or effort to the murals on your building downtown. We're not talking about creating a community symphony here. And I mean, maybe we can do that, and maybe that'd be a great thing. I think that there's a broader opportunity for mischief to be made beyond those basic intended reasons. And that's just it. It may not be the intent of the bill to do that, but I think that there are not enough sideboards on this to prevent that from happening. And so that is my chief concern with this legislation. And again, as I've been saying through this whole process, I mean, we've since forever, we've had for-profit companies and nonprofit, charitable organizations. And so why are we running the risk that could be created in creating this gray area of this for-profit public benefit corporation? I just don't think that by killing this bill, I don't think that we are hampering any economic development. And I don't think that we're closing the doors to any opportunities that aren't already there. And I understand it. 30 some states have already put this legislation into effect. I just don't think that we're missing any sort of a train by not having that. And so that has been my chief concern with this all along, that we are opening the door to unintended consequences that we don't know where they're going to lead. So again, Mr. Speaker, my very sincere apologies for not being here to move this amendment, but for the amendment and against the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Wilson, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm also in favor of the amendment and a no on the bill. And I think this is the first time in 9 years that I've actually got up to talk on a delete the enacting clause. I was just going to sit quietly at my desk and vote no. And Mr. Speaker, I'm going to take a little bit of a wide approach to bring in some of the unintended consequences that we talked about, but I promise I'll end up on the runway in the end. And in the past, I just want to say that I've been very favorable about the work of the blockchain group before. I'm fine with the blockchain, some of the virtual currency things we did. So in no way am I an opponent to that sort of thing. But over the weekend, as many of us did, I got some work done at my day job. This is just a little history to some of my discovery on this. And some of you know I have a translation business, and I was working on a news release for a client in Spain, which is always interesting because you find out things that are happening in Europe that we're not doing here or that they think is great and we're not doing, or the other way around. So in the news release that I was working on this weekend, this company noted that more companies are looking for ways for their businesses to have a positive social and environmental impact. So they were pursuing certification as a certain kind of a corporation, which it's a single letter and it's not in the bill. So I'll just call it a letter corporation. And then they point out that there are more than 3,500 businesses around the world with this certification, which comes from a nonprofit group, and that like 200,000 businesses have used their evaluation method to analyze their social and environmental impact. So when you're translating, it's important to find out if there are standard English phrases about what they're talking about, and so you can use that terminology. So I ended up doing a search on this kind of letter corporation, and it seemed strangely familiar when I landed on it. It said the certified letter corporations are a new kind of business that balances purpose and profit. They are legally required to consider the impact on their workers, customers, suppliers, community, and the environment. A community of leaders driving a global movement of people using business as a force for good. So then I clicked on it because you could say, click here for companies. And I found, for example, there's a company in Vermont that you probably know of. They make ice cream. It's got 2 names on it. There's actually 2 companies in Teton County that have this letter certification, which is actually quite impressive because you have to submit a whole lot of electronic paperwork to get this. And I'm talking certification now. That's not this specific governance structure, but I'll bring that in, Mr. Speaker. And I do want to say that these 2 Wyoming companies do seem to make useful products. So I'm not disrespecting them at all. So just to be clear, have this letter certification, you don't have to be a public benefit corporation. And being a public benefit corporation doesn't mean that you're necessarily a letter corporation. But the FAQ click is always good. So I clicked on what's the difference between a certified letter corporation and a benefit corporation, which is the subject of the bill. And so it tells me that the letter corporation certification is a third-party certification. The benefit corporation is a legal structure, but that the benefit corporation structure fulfills the legal accountability requirement of the letter corp certification. Again, remember, I'm just using letter for a thing. So the 2 things that I'm bringing in here, they're not joined at the tip, but at the hip, but they are surely walking on the same path. And then you can click on another button, how to pass benefit corporation legislation. Here is model legislation. So, and I missed the first few minutes of the original bringer's presentation on committee of the whole. I was off the floor, so I'm not sure if that was presented, but I just want to say that, a person may argue back, well, this legislation is neutral. And my argument, I'm not an attorney, but law can be neutral on its face, but that doesn't mean it necessarily benefits all parties the same. So I have 2 main concerns on the bill. First of all, its aim is to, I would suppose, to bring new businesses into the state. We've already have heard for a number of years that our tax structure is way over reliant on the energy sector. So until we change that, which we've really done nothing toward in this session, that new businesses, new workers will just bleed money off the state. Second, and more importantly, I think, and this is where the unintended consequences come in, I think these businesses would be back to the legislature in a few years asking for changes to labor law and utility law. And here's why I think that. Generally, these benefit corporations are required to publish an annual report that includes an assessment of its performance on these social, environmental, and whatnot performances against some third-party standard. Now, this letter certification group doesn't require a particular third-party standard, but there was a list. They had a lot of web pages on this. And I looked over the lists of possible standards, and I will say there was not one single standard that looked to me like a pro-fossil fuel, pro-gun tradition standard. So I'm just going to, you can't sign up for the whole thing. You'd have to sign up as a business, which I was obviously supposed to be working, but some sample assessment questionnaires. What portion of your management is evaluated in writing on their performance with regard to corporate, social, and environmental targets? Has the company worked within its industry to develop social and environmental standards for your industry? When evaluating the social and environmental performances of significant suppliers, which of the following practices apply? So it's not just even about the company, then they're going to go out to their suppliers of whatever thing and say, are you doing these wonderful things? What % of energy is from renewable on-site energy production? So the thing is, when these businesses get here, they will eventually like things here to work in a way that fits into their concept. Then there's a disclosure checklist on this website. And listen to this. The website says, in all cases, the Standards Advisory Council reserves the right to refuse certification if the company is deemed not to uphold the spirit of the community. I think that's kind of creepy. What do you mean, the spirit of the community? Then there's a checklist. Okay, you're supposed to check and see if you fall into any of these categories, and then they'll decide if you've, remember, this is the certification. It's not the governance structure, but they are so closely aligned that the certification people have a link on their website to legislative model legislation. Okay, so we've got any activity deemed illegal, commercial logging, firearms, GMOs, mining, nuclear power, fossil fuel-based oil or coal utility, pornography, tobacco, and endangered species. Interesting category. So, Mr. Speaker, bringing into the landing strip here, I just think that we have not fully considered what kind of businesses this bill is encouraging to move to Wyoming, whether they'd be good for the state, whether their goals would change us into a different state. So I think we need to put the brakes on this idea, save it for another day after more thought, or maybe for never. Aye on the amendment, no on the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Representative Obermueller, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In favor of the amendment against the bill. A lot has been said already, so I'll keep mine really short, but I have a question for the bringers. If I'm going to be against this, or for the amendment against the bill, unless this question is answered. And the question I have is, what happens if the beneficial purpose is the profit driver? For example, if protecting the environment is the beneficial purpose, and the method of protecting the environment by this company is to sue and settle, and that becomes the profit distributed to stockholders, that to me would be a problem. So if the bringer of the bill could address that concern about whether the beneficial purpose can also be the profit driver, that would help me with my vote. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Representative Yin and then Representative Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, I mean, I guess we should take it back and consider why this bill came forward in the first place. So there was a business that came forward to the blockchain committee, and it was a blockchain-based business that it was looking for specifically a public benefit profit designation for corporations. And, you know, my first question was that I asked them, you know, why do we need this? We have a different type of designation that kind of works for that. And they said that the way the corporation's set up, it just makes sense for their business. And specifically for what the public benefit was for the blockchain business is that they wanted to put some of their public benefit into promoting the blockchain ecosystem. So that's essentially what the public benefit portion of that business were. And, you know, I don't think that business would be able to get the certification that the representative from Cheyenne was talking about. And ultimately, the question is, this is kind of an agreement between the shareholders and the business, and we just define what the parameters are in the mission, right? So if the shareholders agree that the mission makes sense and they're getting enough profit out of it and they agree with the public benefit that's coming forward, I don't see why it would be upon us to get in the way of choosing one decision over another for that. So I'm against the amendment for the bill. I think this just makes sense as another option between shareholders and businesses, and would ask you to vote yes on the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Madam Minority Floor Leader Conley, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against the amendment and in favor of the bill. And folks, if you'll take out your bill and look at page 6, the beginning of page 6 is repeated all throughout the bill. It says that any stock certificate issued by a for-profit public benefit corporation shall note conspicuously that the corporation is a for-profit public benefit corporation, and that the directors of the for-profit public benefit corporation are required to balance the interests of the stockholders and the public benefit identified in the corporation's articles of incorporation. And again, that's repeated over and over again in every element. So to me, what this bill is, it's a shareholder protection act. That's what it is. That is really what it is doing. Because without this, honestly, that kind of company would be in violation, honestly, of any for-profit company, which has as its purpose to maximize benefit for shareholders. That's its number one obligation. Without having this, right, We are saying to those companies, and I'll be honest, on that committee of the whole debate, I remember, I think it was the good chairman of Minerals, talked about a sock company, where if you buy 2 or 3 pairs of socks, one gets given away to homeless shelters. And I like those socks, honestly. I have purchased them, and I like the idea that they give a pair away, right? But let's face it, if you are giving away one of those pairs of socks, you are not maximizing the benefit for your shareholders, right? Just per se, right? You're giving it away. So what this bill does is simply, honestly, obligate those companies that are organized in a way to have both profit and a public benefit to let their shareholders know. Over and over again, they are obligated to let their shareholders know. That makes sense to me. And we are a state that wants to encourage all sorts of businesses. This is a new form. Let's get them here. On and in favor of the bill.
Thank you. Representative Hallinan for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think there's any lack of the activism of business at any level now. We have the banks that don't want to lend money to the firearms companies. We have also many businesses like that that are taking political stands on issues that we really don't agree with. I think that we need to work on our old regimen of businesses working for profit. And for that reason, I think this bill is I'm against the bill and for the amendment. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Olson, first time.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, as the chairman of this committee, I'm obviously against the amendment and for the bill, but there's a lot of things I want to clear up. I just, at the end of the day, vote your conscience on this bill. Go ahead and do that if you really think this is a conscious vote. I really don't think it is. I think we're making a really big deal out about something that really isn't that big of a deal. And that's actually what concerns me more. In terms of the whole lab certification concept, I mean, that's a huge red herring. That has absolutely nothing to do with this law. There are 35 states plus the District of Columbia that have this law. 35 states, and the law has been around for over a decade. Over a decade. So if the boogeyman's hiding under the bed, it's been hiding for a decade, and we're going to see him pop out as soon as we allow for these corporations to be formed in Wyoming. All of a sudden, the boogeyman's going to pop out. I don't think so. Now, in terms of whether some group of individuals may create a public for-benefit corporation that has a mission that you don't agree with, is that a possibility? Yeah, that's a possibility right now. It's been a possibility for a decade. That conversation actually scares me more than the conversation about this bill, because that conversation says that you think that the state of Wyoming should decide which businesses should exist and shouldn't exist simply based on their purpose. That doesn't sound like the free market to me. That sounds like a scary world. I'm not going to go there. We already allow for corporations to exist, and yes, they may exist for a profit purpose, but we don't, as a state of Wyoming, we don't say only if you have the following statement of purpose. If you create a purpose statement contrary to what we believe, then no, you can't be a corporation. We don't say that. We say any lawful purpose. And that's what we're saying here. We're saying that this type of organization can exist in the state of Wyoming if it exists for a lawful purpose. If you don't agree with the purpose of the company, then don't be a shareholder. That already exists right now. I just think what this bill does is it does what's already been happening in America for a decade, beyond almost a supermajority of states. So what it does is continue to diversify Wyoming. What it does is continue to allow for new companies to form in Wyoming. And I hate to say it, but the reality is, whether you like the company or not, its purpose that's going to form, it's either going to form here or it's going to form somewhere else. I think culturally, the things that we've been talking about that the state of Wyoming stands for, I don't know that those corporations are the ones that are being invited in. And if they do, they have a lot to deal with in the culture of Wyoming. Maybe we have some influence on them. Maybe they have some influence on us. But at the end of the day, Wyoming does not say which corporations can exist in our state and which can't based on whether we agree with the content purpose of that company. I'm not willing to go there. I'm afraid that that's where this conversation's heading, and that scares me more than creating a diversity opportunity for new companies to exist in Wyoming. So I'm going to be on and for the bill. Invite you to certainly vote your conscience. If you feel like it's not the right time for Wyoming, then all means, please cast that vote. I'm not going to hold it against you. But I will also clarify just one last thing, and that's the whole purpose of this. It's weird to me that the conversation is that if it's not blockchain, it shouldn't be part of this. This is a statutory committee, and the statutory committee does not just study blockchain. It studies digital innovation, it studies blockchain, and it studies financial technology. And any company that would pursue any one of those purposes are the ones that we're looking at. And those are the ones that came to us, and those are the ones that said, we would love not these other, far left, far right, whatever you want to categorize them as. Those weren't the companies that were testifying in front of us. So I'm going to be on it for the bill and against the amendment.
Thank you. Representative Jennings, first time, Senate File 36.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm glad to hear the previous speaker's not going to hold this against me, but I'm for the amendment and against the bill. So I think about this and I think about the conversation that we've had here. And my fear is that this thing grows legs and goes to places that we don't really know. And so until we're a little more defined, and the good speaker from this town put out some opportunities there of things of where this could go. And I just don't see the sideboards to this. I look at our constituency and we're down here to protect them. And so I just don't, for the amendment and against the bill.
Thank you. Vice Chair Duncan, first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I actually have a question, but I also had a constituent bring the question to me, or the idea to me. And they posed the idea, they were excited about this bill. So I'm against the amendment on the bill because they brought the idea of the little town of LaGrange and a small little store and restaurant combination, and the opportunity to possibly have a group form a corporation like this. So I'm asking the bringer of the bill if this will work. So you bring this group together and they revitalize, they buy this property, they fix it up, and then they sell it and they move on to the next property that's blighted or dilapidated in a small town, and they fix that up. They're not going to make a profit, but they are doing a benefit for the community in these small towns. So there's a lot of people in some of our small towns, some of our communities that are willing to invest just to make our communities better, to reinvest into our communities, to revitalize. So my question is, can I do that with this bill?
Thank you. Chairman Swanitzer, first time, Senate File 36.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was going to divide the argument into two, but now I might have to do it in three. So let me answer the good question first. So historically, 13 years ago now, this is an issue, right? I actually brought a bill back in 2008, long before public benefit companies, and it was a new trendy idea called the L3C, the Low Profit Limited Liability Company, because everyone knew that there was a vast difference between a for-profit corporation and a nonprofit. There has to be something between those two for a whole host of situations, right? A nonprofit is dedicated to doing something charitable and social welfare, and a for-profit has to maximize their value for the shareholders. And in many instances, as we pointed out 14 years ago, those two, there's not a lot of overlap. And so we needed a third option. And so the trendy thing in the country 14 years ago was a L3C. 10 states got there before other states realized, hey, actually we can do one better. we can actually do a public benefit corporation. And it's not a new corporation. You're not seeing any new filing fees or new anything in our laws with this. You're seeing that there's basically, I just call it an addendum onto a corporation saying we have some type of other purpose besides maximizing money to our shareholders. So let me go to my kind of first point as a shareholder, right? Me as an individual, I want to invest in a company and I have a bunch of other people who want to invest in a company. Does it make a difference where I invest? Well, maybe. If company A says we're going to maximize the value to all of our shareholders so you can make as much money as possible, and company B says we're going to maximize profit to our shareholders, except we're going to make sure we only use recyclable materials. We help keep more fish in a pond. We do something that's not 100% maximization to our shareholders because we don't think a part of a company, and the new buzzword is corporate social responsibility, right? I think you've all heard that sweeping the nation. If there's some type of corporate social responsibility we have to our shareholders, not only to maximize their profits, but to do something that is beneficial as part of our company. Me as a shareholder, I get to choose, right? I can go with company A or company B. Why would you not allow me that freedom to invest as a shareholder in a corporation that I want to invest in? Because we have limitations on it maximizing the value. So what the bill really does is allow an addendum onto a current corporation, nothing new, but saying that nobody who is a member of that can come back and sue the corporation for not maximizing their profit. That's really what a public benefit corporation does, is you can no longer demand your corporation say, I want the maximum profit available, as long as your corporation fully tells you, here's what our purpose is. And maybe, I know we talked about 50%, maybe it's 50% or it's 10%, but they have to quantify that. You know, as a shareholder right up front, yeah, it's making profit, but it's got these other, 3 subcategories of what it's doing. It's transparent, it's fair. The number thing, I guess the only other argument I want to make about it is for the last 10 years in Wyoming, we have played this competitive game, right? We are in a competitive marketplace and where you form corporations. The other 2 states, I think I can say, are Nevada and Delaware, and South Dakota is quickly coming forward. And so we, for the past 10 years, this body and down the hall have done everything we can to make sure we are the top of the game. We're probably not going to beat Delaware, but we can easily be number 2 by keeping our state as business friendly as possible. So when 32 states, I believe, offer a public benefit corporation and Wyoming doesn't, we're not in the game. I would love to say the L3C keeps us in the game, but the world has moved on from that. And so if we want to keep getting, it's over $50 million now that we get in revenues from people filing in Wyoming. That goes right in the general fund. If we want to keep that competitive edge, this is just something everybody's doing. It's not new. It's just, we're 5 years behind. And I don't think it actually has anything to do with digital technology or blockchain. We probably should have done it through corporations, but it is something that if we want to maintain our competitive edge, we have to be in the game with everybody else because we got to keep the revenue flowing in. So I would encourage you to defeat the amendment for the bill. It's one more tool in the toolbox, both for me as a shareholder and for us as a legislature, making $50 million a year in filing fees. Many of these corporations don't operate in Wyoming. That's the other thing I don't think has been said. We talk about bringing businesses into Wyoming. A majority of these corporations file here in our state because they like our laws and like our tax-friendly stati, but they don't actually ever come into Wyoming, right? They file here, they go do their good works in other states. We never really see them. So keep that in mind as well.
Thank you. Any of the members, first time? We're on first time, Senate File 36. First time to second time. Representative Hallinan, second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to address one issue, and that is the fact that these companies around the state, around the country, they're fairly small compared to the size of organizations that we have in this country now. And they are major businesses that are running the public's point of view on a lot of issues. And I don't think we need to open this up to those companies. I mean, you can still invest your money in any company you want. Some companies have a social position, they're environmentally favored, or they're involved in social work and stuff like that. You can do that now. But those companies still have to have their major purpose is to make a profit. And I think if we go into the area where their profit is not the most important then we're going to have more of these semi-social companies. And I don't favor that. I think that's a major issue for us to decide. And the fact that 30 states have already approved this doesn't mean that the future is with these big companies. I won't name them. You know the ones I'm talking about, the tech companies. They are in a position where they can control the public's opinion on things. And if we endorse this concept, there will be more of it. And the future is not good. The future is such that the smaller companies are being reduced in their influence, and the big companies are increasing their influence. And I don't think we want to blur the issue between making a profit and being a charitable organization. Right now, companies can have a position and you can buy stock. They have environmentally friendly profiles you can invest in if you want to. So with that in mind, Mr. Speaker, I am against the bill and for the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Still on second time, Madam Minority Floor Leader Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, on and in favor of the bill. And actually, in relation to the last speaker's comments about small companies, at least 10 years ago, or about 10 years ago, I was asked by a small business in my community about a different organizational scheme, right? They didn't necessarily want to incorporate as a for-profit corporation. So I got out the green books and took a good look at them. We've got sections for industrial corporations. We have sections for the Wyoming Business Corporation Act. They didn't really fit for them. And then I looked at, we have 30 pages for cooperative marketing associations, right? So the concern about ranches and farmers, we've got 30 pages in our statutes where we have really good organizational schemes for them to get together and do their work, where their purposes as individuals is to work for a profit, right? But they need to come together to move their goods. And I think any farmer or rancher, and I've had fun and interesting conversations with many of you about how you do it. But again, this did not work for the small business in my community that wanted to organize in a slightly different way. Our statutes are not welcoming for those kinds of small businesses. And they just wanted to turn back some of their profits to the community and how they could do that, right? Let's let them do it, honestly. It's not just companies that want to come to Wyoming, but ones that already exist could really use this as a beneficial means to organize. So again, on and in favor. There's nothing to be afraid of here. All it does is help. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member for their second time? Second time, Chairman Wilson, second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Speaker. I think nothing to be afraid of here. They're only here to help is about the scariest statement I've heard in a long while. But I was just going to say, back to the boogeyman. I just want to point out that everything that I said, I discovered right on the internet of the website of this particular letter corporation. I kind of blundered across it while I was working with my client's work. It's got state by state status of legislation, up to date, 37 laws passed, 4 working on it. It's right there on my screen. You can look at it. So I just feel that, and you can look at what the goals, and again, this particular certification, but they're working very closely with trying to get this legislation passed. We've spent all session trying to spend, setting up programs to encourage certain industries that we feel are good for the state, that we feel are good for the workers of the state. And to then say, well, because everybody else is doing it, we should now open a door that basically is in opposition to all of the business, the economic development we just tried to encourage, doesn't seem to make sense to me. You know, there's an old line that probably your mother said to you, if everybody you knew is jumping off the cliff, does that mean you have to do it too? No.
Thank you, Representative Duncan, for your first time or second time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to pose a question to the body. Had committee number 7 brought this bill, would we be debating as deeply on this? Or are we debating this because of the blockchain committee brought this? So I pose that question to you. If this came by way of corporations, would we go, oh, okay, this is another form of corporations type of business entity model that we could have? Or because it came via blockchain committee, it has a little bit of black helicopter to it. So I really caution why we're going down one road versus another. Again, this is just another potential business model in our corporation realm. So on and for the bill, against the amendment.
Thank you. Chairman Swanitzer, second time.
Thanks, real quick, Mr. Speaker. So again, I just want to leave you with a thought. Right now, if you're a corporation, and without going into all the good reasons why people form corporations, you have two choices. You either maximize your shareholder value to the maximum extent, or you can be sued by your own stockholders, or you're a nonprofit where you can't make enough money or you lose your IRS status, and then you become for-profit where you have to maximize your stock and your shareholder value. There has to be something in between, because there's a whole lot of good organizations that exist for charitable, social, benevolent purposes. We have a great one up in Sheridan. I can't say the name, but it basically takes veterans, right, and gives them a place to live, and they get some profit for that, but they don't maximize their profit because ultimately it's for a benevolent, charitable, social purpose to help out that community. And so if you maximize your shareholder value, you'd be charging them a whole lot more rent. I'm just thinking of the L3Cs we have, but there's a whole lot of good reasons that other states are doing this, because there has to be, in that Venn diagram, there has to be something in the middle between maximizing shareholder value and existing completely as a nonprofit and not making money. And that's why every other state is going to public benefit corporations, because it allows that flexibility that you can do some things in the interest of your stockholders who continue to invest in you. They don't have to invest, they can walk, but it's transparent and they know what's going on. And I would just leave you that Wyoming needs something to fill that gap if we want to continue to attract not only corporate filings, but these type of businesses and entities to do some beneficial things in many of our communities without maximizing shareholder values, while having an indirect profit or indirect motive of helping out, society for a whole lot of good reasons that we could all think of, that isn't maximizing shareholder value to the expense of the people it's trying to help.
Thank you. Other members for their second time. Representative Gray, second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So there's a great deal to be afraid of here, Mr. Speaker, in this change, because it is a huge change. This has way more applications than blockchain. And we can all sit here and say, what is the line? I'd be opposed to this bill in answer to, Mr. Speaker, I'd be opposed to this bill. If it came from the Corporations Committee, I'd be opposed to it. But everybody has a different opinion on what the line is, but I'd say this is beyond the scope of the blockchain committee. And I think that should make it doubly concerning that this big of a change is coming through that select committee. So I just want to clarify what the argument is here. Probably I'd oppose it if it was from the Corporation Committee too, but I think it makes it doubly concerning. So a couple things that I would say about this. One, there's no requirement for annual public benefit reporting that would be public. It says for shareholders, there's a reporting requirement. States that have this generally require that report to be public. And that's another concern, that we won't know what these corporations are doing. Our way of life is under assault, and I think we need to be clear about this. And this bill incentivizes this sort of activity and turns it into an activity where they're going to transfer the proceeds from this activity to shareholders, which incentivizes it. Let's talk about the application of this on a number of different fronts. So first, on the ranching and the ranching lifestyle. There are groups that want to make it so difficult to do ranching or even lock up the land permanently, which I take offense to the point that the land is worth so little that current landowners would be required to sell their properties for pennies on the dollar to out-of-state individuals that can afford it, and turn our state into the Buffalo Commons with 200,000, 250,000 people. And I would pose to you that this bill incentivizes that sort of activity. And I want my children, your children, grandchildren to reach our full potential in our state. And when the land's locked up, or when you can't help when we can't have the land reach its full potential, we're not going to be able to reach our full potential. And another sort of element of application of this, it's an invitation for groups that sue and settle. That's what they do. To come to Wyoming, incorporate in Wyoming, sue federal agencies, and we're in an administration that would certainly agree and engage in this sort of activity. The agency agrees to the stipulations in the lawsuit. And one other thing, they receive their attorney's fees back. And now they can distribute that to shareholders, okay, that engage in that activity. So it's incentivizing that sort of sue and settle mentality. This is just one application, okay? There's others. So it's a monumental shift in thinking about for-profit versus nonprofit activity. And this is becoming a huge business, very profitable to try to make money off of achieving a quote unquote public purpose. I would say a lot of times it's not a quote unquote public purpose, but that's their opinion. And I would say this isn't economic diversification, okay? When we're incentivizing corporate shareholder activity, or the distribution of profits to shareholders in corporations that are going to try to prevent us from reaching our full potential, our core industries, ag in one example, oil and gas, coal. And the idea that the LLC fees off this are an acceptable trade-off, I'd pose to you that those fraction of those fees is not worth what we're potentially bringing into our state. All right, I think I got to everything here. There's a great deal to be afraid of in this bill. And the more I hear about it, the more I get concerned. You know, I'm convinced on economic activity bills in this session. This is probably one of the top 5 ones, if not the top one to be concerned about. So I really urge a no vote on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Olson on the bill, on the amendment to the bill.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Still against the amendment for the bill. I think that the conversation of the good chairman of corporations brought to our attention is an important one regarding low profit LLCs. And to the point of where this bill should go or should not go, I don't know. I have little control over that. But what I do know is the bill did go through the Corporations Committee. And it was in the Corporations Committee that the good chairman began to ask me and the others presenting the bill and advocating for the bill about the low profit LLCs, which I'll admit I knew very little about. But what I learned was that Wyoming created low profit LLCs around 2007, 2008. And so in case you missed that part of the conversation, I think it's important because as I spoke to what 35 other states did, please don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying because 35 states did this, Wyoming should do this. That is not what I said. What I said is that 35 states did this and they've done it for over a decade. So the argument of unintended consequences is very weak when you have a decade worth of formation of these corporations. You have a pretty good idea of what the consequences have been for a decade. Now take that a step further in the state of Wyoming, because these same exact organizations can already exist in Wyoming in two different ways. One, they can exist as a limited liability company, a low profit limited liability company, which is this hybrid version, no different than what we're talking about, since 2008. So well over a decade, these companies could form in Wyoming. And Wyoming hasn't, at least last time I checked, the boogeyman didn't sneak in and destroy the state of Wyoming through low profit LLC. So that's important to the conversation of unintended consequences. And your fear, whether it's rational or not, you have to decide whether your fears are rational or not. I would submit to you that if we've had this form of limited liability company since 2008 in the state, that fear should be pretty low. And if we've had this form of corporation in the country for over a decade, that fear should still be low. And the other reality is that because it exists in 35 other states, those companies or the ones that we are supposedly afraid of, and I'm not saying there aren't some companies that don't have beneficial purposes that I absolutely disagree with, but the reality is those ones that I can think of, they already exist and they already do business in the state of Wyoming. This bill doesn't change that. What this bill does is allow for, and really I think it's been said, it's really not about new companies. It's about a change in existing companies who want to change their formation type to this type of company in Wyoming. That's probably the reality of what we're talking about. I don't know about LLC renewal fees. A conversation about that was brought up. This has nothing to do with LLC renewal fees, nothing to do with that. I'm not sure that this is about revenue to the state of Wyoming as much as it is about what the good chairman of corporations said, staying competitive. When there's 35 other states and we are fighting to be the best or the second best place to domicile and form a corporation, a company, an LLC, a partnership, you name it, then we need to be moving forward on those issues, not pandering to irrational fears. We need to move forward. And that's what this bill does. And I think we have over a decade of time to know what's going to happen with this type of law when you enact it in Wyoming. So on and against the amendment for the bill.
Thank you. Members, second time. Representative Hunt, second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry to run this into lunch, but anyway, it's been said that if this bill dies, we're not stopping anything. That may be true, but I think that if it goes forward, what it creates is a lot of risk and a lot of rabbit holes that we don't want to go down. And the fact is that effectively, everything that this bill says it can put forward, basically that can already be done in one form or another. If there's a for-profit company, yes, that's the goal. That's the reason for their existence, is to create profit for their investors, for their shareholders. But there is nothing in law that says that they can't take some time to do some charitable things on the side. If shareholders can put together an agreement that says we're going to do, whatever it is, adopt a highway. I don't know. I mean, there's plenty of room out there currently existing for companies, big, small, doesn't matter, to donate and give back to their community or to the state or to whatever. What I am most concerned about with this piece of legislation is that it is a drop in the bucket of this broader transformation that we are seeing in society today. And what can little Wyoming do about that? I really don't know. But what it can do is not move this forward. Because whether or not this stops anything or move forward anything is not the issue. The issue is, my fear is that this speaks to this broader transformation of society. What I said the other day, pseudo-capitalism, where the issue is no longer profit for the shareholders and the investors. The issue is for, quote unquote, the greater good. This isn't about individualism anymore. It's about the greater good. So I just, I haven't heard enough to say, what are we gaining out of this? I don't know. But what I do think we gain is a lot of risk. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other member for their second time? There's 3 folks eligible, but I'm not going to remind you who they are. Anyone else for their second time? Second time, Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Speaker, I'd respectfully withdraw third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 36.
Thank you. Senate File 36, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Andrew, Baker, Banks, Bear, Blackburn, Brown, Burkhart, Burt, Clausen, Clifford, Connolly, Crago, Duncan, Eklund, Air, Flitner, Fortner,
No.
Gray, Greer, Hallinan, Haroldson, Harshman, Heiner, Henderson, Hunt, Jennings, Kenner, Knapp, Larson Lloyd, Larson Dan, McGuire, Martinez, Nyman, Newsom, Nicholas, Oakley, Obermuller, O'Hearn, Olson, Ottman, Paxton, Provenza, Roscoe, Schwartz, Sherwood, Simpson, Summers, Stith, Stivar, Sweeney, Walters, Washit, Western, Wharf, Williams, Wilson, Winter, Yin, Zawanitzer. Mr. Speaker. Closing vote. Are there any changes? Closing vote. Burkhart. Aye to no. Further changes. Air. Aye to no. Further changes. Close. Blackburn. Aye to no. Further changes. Closing vote. Vote is closed. 19 aye, 41 no.
House Bill 36, having failed to receive the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill or Senate File, having failed 36, having failed to receive the majority affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, Senate File 36 has failed to pass the House. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House stand in recess until 2:30 p.m.
Committee announcements. Committee announcements. Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 8, Transportation, will meet tomorrow on noon recess to consider one bill, Senate File 73, tolling authority for Interstate 80, and possibly some interim topics.
Thank you, Chairman Paxton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 4, Education, will meet in 5 minutes in room E3 to continue consideration of Senate File 130, Charter Schools, and if time permits, Senate File 127, Wyoming, Learn While You Earn.
Thank you, Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Committee number 7 will meet in 5 minutes in E5 to hear the following 4 bills. Senate File 76, Broadband Development Program. Senate File 152, Connection of Utility Services. Senate File 142, Prohibition on Private Funds for Conducting Elections. And Senate File 112, Insurance Discounts for Accident Prevention.
Thank you. Representative Hunt, privilege of the floor, please proceed.
Mr. Speaker, privilege, please. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Folks, mainly my privilege here is I wanted, we've just debated that bill, and I wanted to apologize to the good chairman of Judiciary. I brought that amendment forward and my name was on it, and then I feel that I did him a great discourtesy by not being here to move that amendment myself. And so I meant no disrespect. I was just The bill prior to that had a great number of amendments, and I thought I'd have time to step out in the hall for 5 minutes, and that didn't work out. But anyway, I feel really badly about not having been here to, move that forward. And so I don't want to belabor that, but anyway, to my good friend, who I have an immense amount of respect for, I meant no disrespect by not being here to move my amendment forward. So my apology to the body, and just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Hunt. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your House Appropriations will meet on adjournment to hear Senate File 121.
Thank you very much. Further announcements. So members, this afternoon, of course, we're going to finish, well, we hope to finish third reading. And then we have 3 concurrences. 2 will be on bills. You received those concurrence notices from last week. And then we will have the presentation of the committee report on the budget. So that'll be this afternoon. If we get through that, we'll have committee of the whole. So the House is in recess until 2:30.